Welcome back to
Norman.
Around the World with Dane Waters. Now we have our first guest with us, Martin J. Hi, Martin. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Good to be here.
So tell us a little bit about you, Martin. What's your background so the world knows I've heard amazing things about you. So tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm a dinosaur. I'm a foreign correspondent who's spent all his life working around the world for all the big media giants and getting fired by most of them. And so now I'm sort of semi-retired and live on the edge of the Sahara in Morocco, trying to be a Google farmer.
A farmer? What kind of farmer?
A Google farmer. A Google farmer is somebody who learns everything from the internet and
Oh,
fails mostly because most of it, what's on the internet is nonsense.
we know I have to agree with that because I was asking Chat GPT something the other day and it was talking about President Biden and I had to remind it that Biden is no longer president.
Uh,
Trump is now elected, so you have
yeah.
to be careful about that.
And was Biden ever president?
Yeah, well, he was probably never there. You're right. So anyway, thanks for joining us today. We want to talk about um, uh, West Africa. We want to talk about Morocco. We want to talk about Western Sahara. We want to talk about, from what I have read about you, that as you talk about you have a very diverse history and a very prestigious history, reporting from around the world. Well, let's start with Morocco itself. Um,
Thank you for those
Most
compliments. I haven't even paid you actually for that.
the invoice, I sent the invoice via Zoom today, um,
I'll catch up
but
later.
yeah. Just don't pay me in Nigerian naira, and we'll be
So
okay.
all these
The
subjects that you're throwing at me are going to get me thrown out of Morocco, but fine, we'll work with
Well, listen, yeah, hey, that's it's a badge of honor, being thrown out of a country.
that.
So let's talk. What is the current state of affairs in Morocco? Because most people think about Morocco as a very stable democracy. Well, if you want to call it democracy, but what's going on in Morocco?
Well, broadly speaking, for a long time, Morocco was the darling of the MENA region for the European Union. It was advanced on almost everything, and you know, um, ticked a lot of boxes and was considered to be very modern, developing Arab democracy. For the last, let me give you the short version because we haven't got that much time. For the last 10 years or so, it's declined on some of these areas, particularly human rights. The economy is doing very well. It's a country that has a certain, I would say, prospects for foreign investors. Largely, the economy is based on tourism and foreign remittances, some big project foreign investment, but not too much. But in terms of looking at the whole region, if we place it, comparatively speaking, it's quite a stable country. It's quite a stable democracy, an emerging democracy, we should say, and it's quite a stable economy. I think it came out of COVID as a survivor. It survived, certainly survived the 2008 crash, and I think it's got a lot going for it. Could be the Singapore of the whole region.
Hmm. Well, but is there unrest taking place these days? I mean, how do I keep
Definitely.
hearing about some unrest. Yeah. So
Yeah, I
tell
mean
us about
that's
that.
so that's really the problem of being successful. I think in many respects the country is having some political problems because of its success rather than like other many countries that are struggling. Morocco is doing quite well. Morocco has a World Cup coming to the country in 4 years' time, and young people in particular are disturbed by some of this euphoria which is being announced on a daily basis about the kind of spending that's going to be going on for the World Cup because they feel as though they have been left out of the whole equation. And this is something which is not new. It's been going on for decades. Generally unemployed single men tend not to feature into the whole political dynamics of the country. And there is a sort of a revolution of sorts, I would say, bubbling. I'm tempted to say velvet revolution because we've had those before. We had an Arab Spring here in 2011, which I covered for CNN. Don't laugh. And it seems to be coming back again. But the younger people now are smarter, much more politically aware, and much better connected on the internet, and are very angry. There's a lot of anger which is bubbling here, which could threaten to um, dismantle or even derail the whole World Cup project, and even create a sort of impetus, a momentum for a whole political revolution.
Well, then how did that, with the Trump administration has been very positive toward Morocco, because Morocco, agreed to the Abraham Accords. Is the relationship with the Trump administration, would you consider a positive for the country these days?
There is no real relationship between Morocco and the Trump administration. It's a proxy relationship via Israel. And so, Trump probably couldn't find Morocco on a map of Africa. Doesn't really care about what he cares about Israel. And Israel stepped forward a few years ago with the Abraham Accords, said to the Moroccans, look, you help us and you acknowledge some of our political statements and we'll acknowledge yours. And for the Moroccans, it was Israel recognizing Western Sahara, and not only recognizing it, but more importantly, doing Morocco's bidding in Washington. So the big dream for the Moroccans was, look, we'll bring Israel closer to us, and Israel will push the Americans to come up with a silver bullet at the UN and push the whole Western Sahara dossier through. That's the big idea. That was the project. I'm not sure we're getting there, and I think the Moroccan elite obviously didn't factor in what happened in Gaza, didn't factor in October the 7th, and that's caused a lot of political problems even back home with the Moroccans, because there's a huge demographic of Moroccans who are really unhappy about these closer relations with Israel. So when we talk about Morocco-America relations, that's a pretty short subject. That's a postcard, because technically speaking, the Moroccans have no real political lobbying presence at all in Washington. I mean, they pay a consultancy company $300,000 or $400,000 a year. What's that for lunch? That doesn't get you even a burger with the cheapest Democrat in town. That Congress is a coin-operated machine, and so $300,000 doesn't even get you presidents, gets you nothing. It's just maybe they were happy that they have a consultancy there, but it's the Israelis, it's the Israel lobby, which is a crucial factor here for everything.
Well, I do want to come back to Western Sahara because it's a topic I'm very interested in. But before we do that, let's talk about the Abraham Accords. What are your thoughts on the Abraham Accords?
It's me. We haven't got that time, really, Dane. How can I condense this? It's. I think it's. I'm wondering whether this was a wise move, specifically for Morocco. I'm wondering if it's a wise move for Morocco and for some of the other partners to race ahead with this. I mean, one can see why Israel wants to be aligned, wants to be brought closer to Arab countries. There's a lot of common sense there. But when we talk specifically about Morocco, I'm not sure they got a good deal. The promise of Western Sahara, the promise of Israel doing its bidding in Washington hasn't really been, released. I mean, okay, part of that deal was Trump recognized Western Sahara. He did that in his last week or 2 weeks in office, his first term. And that was a huge thing here. That was a really, really big deal for the Moroccans. But the Moroccans now are becoming a little bit impatient. They're saying, well, okay, we need to go further now. I mean, who runs the UN? America. Hello. We all know that. And just recently, the Moroccans have had an extraordinary success with Russia. They've just had a breakthrough in the last few days whereby the Russians have said, in theory, okay, we might back your Western Sahara ideas at the UN, if a few other conditions are in place. Russia was always the as the French say, the blocage, the resistance on the UN Security Council level. So in theory, they've got all their ducks lined up. What they really need is America to push it over that line, use its clout, which it could easily do for the few member states around the world who are blocking it. It could easily push it through, and that's really what the Americans are hoping, and the Moroccans are hoping for with the Abraham Accords. That's really what was in it for them. The idea of for the Israelis, of course, and for the Americans, there was another agenda there, which was slightly more nefarious. The Israelis looked at the Moroccans and said, "Okay, well, we'll do all this for you, and you'll recognize our state." But also, you could spend a little bit more on defense spending. I mean, your $2 billion a year is a bit pathetic, So, so now the Moroccans are up to a reported something like $15 billion a year defense budget, which is huge when you consider the economy of this country. And of course, it's nearly all American kit. So that's a second layer and a third layer. The Abraham Accords is very much like an onion. You can just keep on peeling layers.
Well, I'll come back to the Abraham Accords, but let's go back to Western Sahara real quick. I mean, for the audience, for those people who don't know, Western Sahara is this is a really a very simplistic way of saying it, but Western Sahara is the only place in Africa that did not gain its independence after the decolonization in Africa earlier last century. But and it's been a constant fight. Do you think that if Morocco gets its way, and it basically takes over all of Morocco, do you think the Polisario will decide to get more active again, and maybe there'll be some terrorism that takes place?
The critical factor will be Putin, Russia. They will do what Russia tells them to do, and if Russia indicates that it's not worth their while to carry on this campaign, but actually to look to Morocco, to do some deals with Morocco, to create a corridor to the Atlantic, which could easily be done. Um, I mean, we've got an arms race here. Are you talking about a country of, I mean, $15 billion a year on arms that Morocco doesn't really need? Morocco doesn't need F-35s. Christ's sake, what are you going to do with F-35s? Where's the war? You know,
Yeah.
you could even argue that the West doesn't need F-35s, but I don't see how this arms race is benefiting neither the Algerians or the Moroccans. There's been a reported breakthrough by the Americans who have said they think they've got Witkoff and a few of his cabal have said that they think they've got some sort of a deal with the Algerians. I'm skeptical. We'll have to see what it is. But if we can break this Algeria-Morocco tension and we can get a deal in Western Sahara, all that money could be directed to startups for investment, for healthcare, roads, schools, hospitals, you name it. But I think F-35s, Morocco doesn't need F-35s.
No, the amount of money that you could, if you didn't buy those F-35s, you could basically take care of everyone in the Western Sahara, is what you could do. So if you didn't even buy those. So what is the long-term, just so I'm clear on this, what is the long-term plan for Western Sahara among the Moroccans? Is it to annex it, to make it part of Morocco? Is it to make it it's not going to be a sovereign nation. So what is the long-term plan?
Well, it will be. I think it will be a sovereign nation. It'll be a sovereign nation in exactly the same way that Wales is to many people in Britain a sovereign nation. It will have an independent border, it will have its own assembly, it will have its own members of parliament, its own flag, and probably its own national anthem. But in all ways important, it'll still be part of Morocco. That's really the idea. So you need to keep all these people happy geopolitically around the world, but you also need to keep indigenous people happy there. And I think the semi-autonomous plan is quite smart. I mean, it's in many ways it's an incredibly boring subject, diplomatically speaking. The diplomats have got this phrase, this terminology, which I can't even remember. It's so boring. But there is this sort of standard printout, which I think they circulate amongst themselves, where they say Morocco's Western Sahara plan is credible, it's feasible, and they have all these buzzwords which they all repeat. But what they don't say, what Moroccan press never ever points out, is when you talk about Britain supporting Western Sahara, France, or Spain, there's always one single, tiny, tiny, tiny little line buried in the text from those EU member states, particularly, which says we support Morocco with its credible Western Sahara semi-autonomy plan, as long as indigenous people go along with it, and that's code for as long as there's a referendum. And this is why skeptical old journalists like me, who've got the grey hairs, which you pointed out, you're very kind, get you for that later.
At least you have hair. Okay, you have hair. I
I
don't.
wasn't going to
Okay.
say that. I wasn't because that would be
Yeah.
too cruel. Too low hanging fruit. But I'm skeptical old grey buzzers like me who look at the detail, look at that and say, well, then that's just stuck in the mud then. Because if Britain still has that one line, I think it's the last line of the statement by the Foreign Office, as long as this is acceptable by the indigenous people there, code for referendum, we're never going to get anywhere because the Moroccans don't want a referendum. They had the opportunity in 1990 to do that, and they turned it down because they know statistically that probably wouldn't go in their favor. So the reason why this has gone on for so long is because they refuse to do the referendum. And if you talk about going around the houses, we're talking about 30 years now. More than 30 years. My maths is terrible. So the idea of this silver bullet from the Americans is the big dream, and we are edging towards it. No question about it. But it's it's critical the role that Israel plays in lobbying on behalf of the Trump administration. So all these things are linked. Even Gaza is linked. Even deals, they're all linked to keeping Morocco on board, keeping Israel as its lobbying partner, keeping defense spending up to keep the Americans happy, keeping the Abraham Accords, recognizing the state of Israel and the occupied territories, and recognizing Western Sahara as Moroccan's true sovereignty.
Listen, there's so much we can talk about here. So let's go real quick to the Abraham Accords. Many people argue that the reason October 7th happened was because Saudi Arabia was hedging on recognizing Palestinian state, and while it discussed the possibility of joining the Abraham Accords. I mean, what's your take on Gaza and what's going on there?
Well, you're not going to like it. I'm sorry. I know that your views
I
on
might.
Israel.
You never know. You never know.
I'm deeply skeptical about October the 7th. I mean, people are going to call me a conspiracy theorist, but I think it was planned. I think Netanyahu knew about it for a long time beforehand. And there's a very similar parallel there to what happened in 9/11 in New York. I think the Netanyahu knew what was going on. I think he even encouraged it. I think it was a perfect pretext to launch what's going on today, which is not a war. Let's not call it a war. It's a genocide. It's ethnic cleansing. I think this is all part of the bigger plan. I can't believe that that so many soldiers were moved out the day before along the border. I can't believe that so much CCTV footage is missing. I can't believe, so many of these extraordinary, and the killing of Israelis, by idea forces, moving in bodies, the amount of helicopter gunfire. All of these awkward facts don't really stand up the October the 7th idea based on the Western narrative that it was just an isolated incident. There was nothing for it. We don't have journalists anymore in the West. Our journalists in Britain are just hopeless. You can't even call them wordsmiths. We are living in a period of social media whereby almost journalists are forced to avoid nuance in their reporting. How can you report October the 7th as an isolated instance without looking at the background of the last 30, 40, 50 years of the most brutal occupation in history, which is what the Israelis have done to the Palestinians. Let's not call it anything else, And so all these things are related, On October the 7th, even if Netanyahu didn't know about it, I think it was inevitable. It was brewing for a long, long time. But I think he did know about it. I think he assisted in it. And in exactly the same way that I think the Bush administration knew 9/11 was coming, in exactly the same way that President Erdogan in 2016 knew that the coup was about to take place. He knew it was happening, and he manipulated the situation and moved everything to his advantage. I think dictators do that. I called Netanyahu a dictator. Quick, cut me off. They're the only democracy in the Middle East. How can you keep a straight face when you say that?
Yeah, I know. It's, how we define democracy these days is very, very, very loose. But I would also argue, that a lot of people have to understand that, Netanyahu specifically, the Israelis specifically, wanted to keep the Palestinian Authority out of Gaza. They did not want joint governance of the West Bank and Gaza because a divided West Bank and Gaza made it even more difficult for there to be a two-state solution. So I'm not jumping on the conspiracy bandwagon yet, yet is the key word. But I do believe that. Yeah, but I do believe that there's a lot about it that first of all, I have to say this to be very clear. I mean, the killing of any individuals, whether it's on the Israeli side or the Palestinian side, is heinous, and or wish we could get into a part of society where we didn't have to kill people and people didn't die each and every day. But that's a different story. Real quick before we go, because we only have a minute left, what do you think is the greatest risk in the Middle East these days? And what do you, if you had to look 5 years in the future, what would you say where the Middle East would be?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story. Steve Bannon asked me the same question in 2016.
Oh my God! Don't put me in the same category as Steve Bannon, please.
I told him at that time. I said Erdogan and Turkey were the greatest risk because they had so much to prove, and they were looking at building their own hegemony and regional power base. Blah, blah, blah. 2 weeks later, a Saudi newspaper interviewed Bannon, and he was asked the same question, and he repeated verbatim what I told him. But I think today, you're not going to thank me for this, Dave, but I think it's Israel's expansion, Israel's idea that it can expand into Syria, into parts of Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and even parts of and other parts around the world. This is really the the greatest risk because it divides the Arab world right down the middle and will keep the Arabs squabbling amongst themselves even more than ever before. And it's totally untested. The thing about Israel and Netanyahu is they don't have long-term strategies. They don't think long-term. It's so weird. You'd think that regional power would, but I think the biggest threat now, is, I've been writing about it today, is this inevitable war with Iran, which is probably weeks away. Both sides have been preparing for it, but it's the biggest risk now is that war. Trump is going to be dragged into it. He's not going to have a choice about it, and it's no longer a war with Iran. So I think my minute's up. But basically, it's a war with Russia and China as well, and Pakistan. That's just recently, just 2 weeks ago, signed a nuclear pact with Saudi Arabia, the country you mentioned earlier. So, there's no good outcomes. There's nothing positive to see in that scenario. The best we can hope for is, I don't know, Netanyahu who's got medical problems and he has to resign very quickly, and that creates a political turmoil and a new, different way of thinking about what's inevitably going to happen.
Well,
Was that
Martin,
60
listen, it's been
seconds?
there was more than 60 seconds, but listen, it was great. And listen, I really enjoyed this conversation. I really wish we had more time, and I hope I can get you back on the show again in the future. But thanks for your time, Martin. Okay.
With pleasure. Cheerio.
Thanks for being with me. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with our next guest.